e homa I rangatira mā tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai haramai rā ki te whare tāpiri o te whare wānanga o Waikato, koutou te hanga mātaki whakapiripiri mai ana ki tēnei kaupapa o tēnei pō. Nau mai haramai rā. My name is Alistair Jones and I'm the Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the University of Waikato, and it's my pleasure on behalf of the University to welcome you here this evening for this inaugural Professorial lecture by Professor Rich Masters. Inaugural Professorial lectures are the University's opportunity to introduce and showcase our newest professors to the wider community. It's a chance for you to find out what our academic staff are doing and how their work is making an impact on the world around us. Tonight we'll hear from Professor Rich Masters from Te Oranga School of Human Development and Movement Studies in Te Tangata, the Faculty of Education, and he joined the university in July 2014 as an expert in the field of experimental psychology. Rich holds a first-class honours degree and master's degree in psychology from the University of Otago and a D.Phil in experimental psychology from the University of York in England. Prior to joining the university, he held positions as director, assistant director at the Institute of Human Performance at the University of Hong Kong from 2001 to 2014. Before that, he lectured in the School of Sport and Exercise Sciences at the University of Birmingham in England from 1994 to 2001. Rich is interested in psychological markers which influence the way in which people learn and perform skills. His research into implicit motor learning shows that it is possible to acquire real-life movement skills implicitly without conscious access to or awareness of the knowledge that underlines performance of those skills. His work crosses discipline boundaries into rehabilitation, surgery, speech sciences, movement disorders, ageing, sports sciences, psychology, and developmental disorders and disabilities. Professor Masters has published more than 170 papers, books and book chapters, and he's published his work in top-ranked journals of many different disciplines, including surgery, neurorehabilitation and neural repair, brain stimulation, Journal of Experimental Psychology, Psychological Science, Medicine, Sport and Science, and Sports Science and Exercise, and many more. He's held grants totalling close to $4 million from funding bodies from Hong Kong, the Netherlands, and from ESRC and the Royal Society in the UK. He was a recipient of Unitas 21 Fellowship in 2004 and presented the Dr. Tom Anderson Memorial Prize in Sport and Exercise Science at the 2006 Annual Conference of Sports Medicine New Zealand and Australasian College of Sports Physicians. This evening, Professor Masters will discuss his research journey and the skill of getting people to learn without knowing that they are learning. Please welcome Professor Masters.
Thank you, Alistair. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Greetings to all of you. And particularly strong greetings to my family, who often have to listen to me banging on about stuff, but usually not in quite such a public place. I guess before I start, I should acknowledge all the people colleagues, friends, accomplices, who've been with me on the journey the last 20, 25 years of my research. I'm very grateful to all of them, and I'm very proud of the fact that I'm friends with all of them still. I've supervised about 24 or 25 PhD students. There are some PhD students in the room at the moment who I'm very proud to be supervising. So this is not a journey that I've taken on my own. It's a journey that I've shared with many, many people, and I'm proud to have shared it. I recall the moment that I fell in love with science. I was on the second floor of Otago University Library. I was sitting in one of the little cubicles. It was late at night on a Friday, it was quiet. And I was working on my honours dissertation. And I was working on something called mental practice. And even then I was interested in the way we learn skills and we perform skills. And as a lazy young teenager, I rather liked the idea of mental practice because mental practice involves basically sitting back, doing nothing, and seeing yourself getting better in your head. I thought that was rather cool. But I had a hypothesis. My hypothesis was that the mental practice effect may well be a meditation effect. That is, if you do mental practice, your performance improves because you kind of concentrate, and that's exactly what happens when you do meditation. So I was reading up on things like meditation, and I noticed that when you do meditation, you often get vasodilation of the forearms and the wrists. In other words, you get increased blood flow to the forearms. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be cool if I could discover that when people do mental practice, they also get increased blood flow to the forearms? That would kind of connect meditation and mental practice together. And so I started searching the journals, and I hunted and I hunted and I hunted, and at last I came across evidence, if you like, that indeed in mental practice, this vasodilation or increased blood flow to the forearms actually occurs. Oh, gee, I was pleased with myself. I felt like a detective. I felt like a Miss Marple. Although I had a moustache, so perhaps I felt like Poirot. Although Poirot is a bit old. Maybe Magnum P.I. It's more like it. Although if I think about it, I mean, Miss Marple actually probably had a moustache, so perhaps I was more like Miss Marple. So I was hooked. I was hooked on science and I was hooked on research. And I decided to do a PhD. And I was offered a scholarship to go to the University of York in the UK. And as all young Kiwis do, it was really an opportunity to get to Europe and see where my rallies came from, that kind of stuff. So I took a year to work, to earn some money to go. And I worked as a picture framer in Dunedin. And during that year, I came across some studies, if you like, that changed the way I thought about skill learning and, in fact, the way I thought about life. I used to play chess with a gentleman who was one of the best chess players in the country. And for the life of me, I can't remember his second name. All I can remember is his first name. It was Dennis. So I used to play chess with Dennis in the picture framers. Morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, without fail, we played chess for 1 year. And he was, he's one of the best chess players in New Zealand. I could not get even remotely close to Dennis. And I began to think, well, he was in his 60s. This is simply, Dennis is smarter than me. He's hardwired to be smarter. And then I came across work by a gentleman called Chase and Simon in 1973. And Chase and Simon had done some work in chess in which they'd compared grandmaster chess players with complete novice chess players. And what they'd asked them to do was to look at a chessboard with pieces on it for 5 seconds. It was called the 5-second recall task. And after 5 seconds, the chessboard was removed, and people were asked to say how many pieces were on the board and where were they. And what Chase and Simon found was that the grandmasters were very, very, very good at doing this task, much better than the novices. But only when the pieces were on the board in a game set out as a game. If the pieces were on the board and they were completely random positions, there was absolutely no difference in recall between the experts and the novices. And I was very relieved by that, because that told me that expertise and skill isn't hardwired. Expertise and skill is about the knowledge that you acquire, the way you structure it, and the way you use it. So I was awfully relieved. And then I came across some more literature, which changed the way much of my philosophy even today. E.W. Crossman, in 1959, had gone back and processed 40 years of data from Cuban cigar rollers, primarily ladies in Cuba. And Crossman had found some remarkable data. Crossman had found that in the first year, these ladies generally rolled about 100 cigars. But by 7 years of rolling cigars, that same one skill, just rolling a cigar, that's all they did, after 7 years, they'd rolled 10 million cigars, which is a phenomenal number of cigars to roll. And to put it in context, Michael Jordan calculates that he threw about 1 million passes in his career, so well short of the 10 million that Crossman found in the Cuban cigar rollers. But that's not why I'm telling you the story. What is remarkable about this data is that after 7 years and 10 million cigars, Crossman's data showed that these cigar rollers were still getting better. They were still getting faster and more efficient at rolling cigars. And that tells me something about skill. In fact, it tells me something about life. There's no reason for you to slow down. There's no reason that you can't continue to get better and better and more skilled. And all you have to do is overcome fatigue, boredom, injury, whatever it is. But your skill levels can continue to improve because you're never going to complete 10 million trials of whatever skill it is you wish to improve. So, I got on the plane and I went to York University. Very exciting times. And at York, I was influenced by another person, another gentleman. And his name was Scott Hoch. And he influenced me for all the wrong reasons. Because Scott Hoch was a professional golfer. And in 1989, he was in the US Masters tournament, and he was leading the tournament. And he was on the final hole on the final day. And he had a putt that was about this long. And all he had to do was to knock that putt in, and he was going to win the tournament. He was being chased hard by a very famous English golfer called Nick Faldo. And you guessed it, Scott Hoch missed that 2-foot putt. It's called a gimme in golf. So that allowed them to go to a playoff. And on the very next hole, Scott Hoch missed another putt of the same distance. And Nick Faldo won the tournament. So poor Scott Hoch missed out on winning, probably at those days, $1 million US. He missed out on the fame and the fortune and so on. And he was clearly very, very gutted. And his response to why he had failed under the immense pressure of making those putts was that as he stood over the putts, he knew too much about what he was doing. He was too aware of making the putts. So I saw this, I processed this, and I had two, if you like, light bulb moments, if you wish to call them that. Firstly, was the concept of reinvestment. Reinvestment is a very simple concept. It is a tendency to consciously control your movements. And in watching what had happened to Scott Hoch, I started to wonder, perhaps people have different dispositions to consciously control their movements. Maybe you can measure those. And so I developed something that's become known as the theory of reinvestment. The theory of reinvestment proposes that we all have different personality dispositions in terms of how much we're likely to consciously monitor and control our movements. And over many years, we've shown that you can measure this reinvestment using psychometric scales, and that it discriminates all sorts of different populations. So stroke patients, for example, in comparison to age-matched controls, display very high levels of reinvestment, so high levels of conscious control. Elderly fallers compared to elderly non-fallers display the same discrimination, very high levels of reinvestment. Parkinson patients, the longer a Parkinson patient has had the disease, the higher they score on the reinvestment scale. So over time, their personality disposition changes, if you like, and they use more and more conscious control of their movements. You might wish to think of it as overthinking. You've all done it. Recently, possibly the roads have been icy, and you may have slipped, and then as you walked from then on for a few minutes, you found yourself thinking very carefully about how you were walking in order not to slip again. So reinvestment was one concept that Scott Hoch, if you like, had loaned me. Aligned with this concept of reinvestment, I started to wonder, is it possible that you can learn your skills with no conscious knowledge so that you can't do reinvestment? Is it possible that Scott Hoch could have acquired his skills in such a way that when he stood over those putts, he had no information. He couldn't consciously think about what he was doing because there was nothing to bring to consciousness. And I turned to this implicit motor learning. And in jest, I described this talk as the epic journey of implicit motor, or epic story of implicit motor learning. I'd like to think so, but I'm not foolish enough to kid myself. The thing about learning unconsciously is actually not as silly as it sounds. So if we go back about 1.5 million years, we get to the Herculean period. And in the Herculean industry, knappers used to create flake stone or flint, and they used to create things like spearheads. Now what you see here is actually an S-twist hand axe. And there's the S-twist, a bit like a propeller. And our ancestors made axes out of these, and these are very, very sophisticated axes, because when you strike with this axe, you can twist it, and in twisting it, you can get the axe to dig deeper, rather like a screw screwing into wood. You can get it to go deeper. But by twisting the axe back the other way, you can loosen it very, very easily and very quickly. These are very sophisticated tools. In order to make one of these tools, something very special had to happen for our ancestors. They had to be able to hold in mind information. Because when you flake one side of this stone, you then have to turn it over to flake the other side in the opposite direction, which means you have to hold in mind what the other side looks like. And in a sense, this 1.5 million years ago was the beginning of development of what we now know of as working memory. And working memory is absolutely vital, because working memory is what allows us to learn languages, to speak, to test hypotheses, to hold information at a party when someone gives you their phone number. Working memory does that for you. So this 1.5 million years ago was the beginning of human language, if you like, of human consciousness, of the human ability to hold and use knowledge. So, if we stay with the evolutionary argument, if you go back before we had language, before the Herculean period, we still had to move, and we still had to move effectively. If we didn't move effectively, we died out. So we only had unconscious processes, if you like, non-verbal, implicit processes available to us. When we went hunting and we got attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, if we became so anxious when we threw that stone to ward off the tiger that we missed because we were so anxious, what happened was we died. So all implicit mechanisms, in essence, died out if they weren't stable and robust. Only stable, robust, unconscious, implicit mechanisms survived. And I contended that even now we have vestigial parts of the brain that if we can reactivate those during learning, we can create learning which was incredibly powerful, incredibly robust, incredibly stable under things like psychological stress. So, And this is the first paper I published, and it is a paper that's been cited many, many, many times. And in it, I basically tried to evoke these vestigial mechanisms of the brain by using a very, very simple approach. I asked people to learn a task while doing a secondary task. Simple as that. So if I asked the Senior Vice-Chancellor, for example, to come up here, or Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor, should I say, to come up here, and to begin juggling for us if he's never juggled before. And if I asked him to count backwards in sevens from 1,422 while he was doing it, he would find that extremely difficult to do. He's a remarkable man, so naturally he could do it. What is amazing, however, is that he would learn to juggle. He would be unaware of how he was learning to juggle because his mind is so concentrated on generating numbers counting backwards that he would not know how he was doing the juggling, but he would be able to do the juggling. And if I then placed him under extraordinary stress, I can't offhand think how I might do that, but electric shocks jump to mind. Because he'd learned in this implicit unconscious way, his juggling would remain stable. It wouldn't break down under pressure. Pretty remarkable stuff. And we've shown this in in hundreds of studies, and not only ourselves, other people have replicated this work again and again. Now, I don't have time to go into all the different ways in which we can bring about implicit learning. So what I'm going to do is just talk you through some of the techniques we've used, some of the ones that I particularly like. One method we've used is analogy learning. In analogy learning, you form a mental model of a new concept, simply by aligning it with something familiar from experience. And what you can see here is basically a solar system. And what you can see here is an atom is like a solar system. And in fact, that is an analogy. An atom is like a solar system. And our own Ernest Rutherford used that analogy. So an atom has a nucleus with electrons rotating around it in the same way that a solar system has a sun with planets rotating around it. And we've used this principle to do skill learning. And this is one of my favourite clips that I thought I would show you. So this is River Dance, Michael Flatley. Goes on for hours. I'm not going to show it to you for hours, by the way. That, of course, is tap dancing. So imagine if I was trying to teach you that by giving you rules and explicit instructions. In other words, getting you to consciously control how you did it. It wouldn't be easy, would it? What if I used analogy, though? This is Lee Mack, live at the Apollo.
That's my vague attempt at river dance, in case you're wondering what that is, Bob. It's very easy to do river dance. You just got to stand there going, can you smell dog shit? Can you smell dog? You stood in dog shit. Is it me? Oh, it's fucking me, I don't believe it. It's absolutely disgusting.
Well, that's how powerful analogy learning is. Remarkably simple, but remarkably effective way to bring about effective skill learning. Another technique we use is errorless learning. Speaks for itself, doesn't it? B.F. Skinner used discriminant learning to train pigeons how to peck a red dot. So basically, very simple. Whenever the pigeon pecked the red dot, it was rewarded with food. Whenever it pecked the green dot, it wasn't. So over time, the pigeon would learn to peck the red dot. It would be conditioned to realise the red dot was the one that was going to give it food. That was a trial and error process for the pigeon. It would peck the red dot, then it would pick the green dot. Nothing for the green dot, so it pecked the red dot again, and eventually it would learn to discriminate. B.F. Skinner had a very smart PhD student called Herbert Terrace. And Herbert Terrace did something really cool. Herbert Terrace taught pigeons how to discriminate errorlessly. All he did was he showed the pigeon the red light or dot, nice and bright and clear, and the pigeon would peck it and it would get fed. And then he presented the green dot, very, very faint, so faint the pigeon barely saw it, so the pigeon would ignore it. And gradually, and then he'd present the red dot again, and the pigeon would peck it and it would get fed. And gradually he increased the density of the green dot and the brightness. Gradually and gradually and gradually. But the thing was, it was so slow, the pigeon never actually pecked the green light. It only ever pecked the red light. So it learned to discriminate red from green, having never made an error. And what Herbert Terrace, this is 1936, reports, is that the pigeons were psychologically happier, having made no errors when they were learning. It goes against our typical view of how you should learn. Everyone says, oh, you should learn by making mistakes. Actually, we have a vast amount of literature that shows that actually errorless learning is a very powerful tool, and it evokes different mechanisms when you learn. I'll give you one lovely example, one of my favourites. In this particular study, we asked older people over 70 years and younger people of the average age is 19 or 20, something like that, to learn a golf putting task. And we asked them to learn it by practicing from long distances where they made lots of mistakes. So they learned in a very conscious trial and error manner. Or we asked them to learn from really short distances where they made no mistakes at all. So what you see here is a person starts putting from 25 centimetres, less than Scott Hoch's missed putts. So they don't miss any. And then they gradually get a little bit further away, a little bit further away. So very similar to Herbert Terrace's principle. This is what you see for the explicit conscious learners. As you would expect, the older people learn slower. They're always worse in their learning. And that's what you would expect. That's what we're told. As you get older, you learn more slowly and you learn less effectively. There's our implicit learners, our unconscious learners, our errorless learners. Absolutely no different. And we've replicated that work on a number of occasions now. So our techniques, our paradigm, if you like, our errorless paradigm, is a very powerful paradigm. This is probably my favourite clip. Another technique we've used is subliminal learning. I don't have time to go into it in detail, but watch this.
Look, I have a deck of cards. What I want you to do is from in this deck, I want you to try to see one card. Not this one, but look closely. Try to see one inside. Did you get one? Here, I'll do it again. It might have been too quick. Try to see a card inside if you can. Did you see one? You think you did? Don't say it. Just hold it in your mind. I know this is not it, but visualize your card right here.
Did anyone pick the Queen of Spades? Did anyone pick a king by any chance? This is real magic. This is psychological magic. So what David Blaine does, I mean, I wouldn't even describe this as a trick. He just uses psychological principles. He flicks through the cards. You'll notice that he flicks through the cards holding them like that. That's because he can control the cards very carefully with this finger. He shows the last card slightly longer than all of the other cards. He shows it at what we call your subjective threshold. What that means is that you see the card, but you're not aware that you've seen it. Not until it's pointed out to you. So when he says pick a card, pick any card, you pick the card that he showed you ever so fractionally longer at your subjective threshold. All of the other cards he flipped through so quickly that they're what we call your objective threshold, so you don't see them. So it's a very simple principle. He's presented information to you at below your limen, if you like, or limen of consciousness. But you've received the information, you just don't know you've received the information. We've used this principle. Would you like to see that again? Go on then.
Look, I have a deck of cards. What I want you to do is from in this deck, I want you to try to see one card. Not this one, but look closely. Try to see one inside. Did you get one? Here, I'll do it again. It might have been too quick. Try to see a card inside if you can. Did you see one?
I probably picked it up that time.
Think you did? Don't say it. Just hold it in your mind.
Good, isn't it?
I know this is not it, but visualize your card right here.
So we've used that same principle using what's called a Kista scope. They don't make them anymore. You can present information to people at their subjective threshold. So if you're teaching someone how to throw accurately, for example, you can present information to them about where their throw went that they don't know they're getting. What's remarkable is they end up learning. People get really, really accurate, but they're looking in this Kista scope, and the information they're seeing is so fast that they'll say, well, I didn't see anything. You didn't show me anything. But in fact, we did. We showed them where the target was and where their throw had gone relative to the target. And if we force people to guess where the throw went, they're actually surprisingly accurate. So that's a form of implicit learning that we've used that's a lot of fun. I wish I had more time to talk about it. We also have lots of objective evidence for this idea of implicit motor learning. And in some of our work, we've used electroencephalography, and no matter how many times I say it, I always stumble over it. EEG. EEG measures electrical activity that seeps through to the scalp. And different parts of the brain that are active release more electrical activity, which seeps through to the scalp. And we've used a concept called cortico-cortical communication to examine what happens when people learn in this unconscious fashion. So the frontal cortex area here controls motor behaviour and motor planning, whereas the left temporal area here, the T3 area, controls verbal analytical behaviour. We had a very simple hypothesis. If we use these techniques I've just shown you to train people in certain skills, when we measure EEG during their performance, what we should see if they've learned implicitly, unconsciously, is very low communication between those two areas, which actually is really simple if you think, it's quite elegant if you think about it. Basically what we're saying is, well, if you've learned implicitly, there'll be no verbal analytical involvement in controlling the movement. And that's exactly what we find. If I gave you the reinvestment questionnaire right now and measured everybody's propensity here to use conscious control when they're moving, those of you who score high on that scale, and you would be people more likely to fail under psychological pressure, for example, because you'll tend to overthink your movements, you would score very high in terms of your cortico-cortical communication. In other words, these areas would be talking to each other a lot. Those of you who score very low on that scale would have very low cortico-cortical communication. In other words, the motor planning would be going on without any interference from the verbal analytical areas. And we've done this work in surgery, in laparoscopy, for example. We've shown that there's neural efficiency when you learn implicitly in surgery that ends up creating very effective multitasking. So surgeons, for example, multitasking is very important. A surgeon carrying out an operation has to be able to monitor blood pressure and listen to the nurse or the anaesthetist and respond when he's asked if he'd like a cup of tea, and so on and so forth. We've also begun to do work in transcranial direct current stimulation. And when you use transcranial direct current stimulation, what you're actually doing is you're passing a very mild electric current through the brain. And you can encourage activity or suppress activity of different parts of the brain. And what we've shown is that if we suppress, using a cathodal current, if we suppress frontal activity is very conscious controlling activity, we can get people to learn implicitly. How about that? So we can manipulate the way people learn a skill just by using transcranial direct current stimulation to suppress the frontal motor area when they're learning the skill. And we're doing lots of work in this area at the moment. Another thing that we've started doing that's very exciting is for a long time, I've wondered about why everybody examines falling in terms of prevention. So most of the literature out there is about how you prevent people from falling. And something that I'm very interested in is not about preventing falling, it's about getting people to fall safely. Everyone's going to fall eventually, we've all done it. Can you actually train people to fall and be less likely to injure themselves? Obviously, with the ageing population in the world and in New Zealand, that would be pretty cool. So, I'm very lucky to have in our department, of course, in our school, should I say, Karen Barber, who's here in the audience. Hi, Karen, a reviewer. Karen teaches dance and researches in dance. And we've been talking. And Karen said to me, well, no, we dancers, that's pretty much the first thing we do. We learn how to fall. We spend our whole career choreographing falling. So Karen and I are beginning to explore the possibility that we can track down, in fact, we've got a summer scholarship to begin the work, track down older dancers, find out whether they've fallen, and find out whether, if they have fallen, whether they injure themselves less severely than people in the normal population. So that's a really exciting project to be part of. And there's another element to that, because if we find that older dancers do fall more safely and hurt themselves less severely, now we have to find a way to train older people to fall safely. And that's where some of the implicit motor learning paradigms that I've talked about kick in. And a perfect example is analogy learning. Because the beauty of analogy learning is that you can use the analogy very quickly. So we're talking, and right now we're testing a variety of different analogies, such as fall like an octopus. So what happens when you tell someone to fall like an octopus? You can't give someone instructions, explicit rules about how to fall safely, because on the way to the floor, in that 1 second that they have to decide how to fall, they don't get a lot of opportunity to process a lot of rules at a conscious level. But the unconscious is far faster. So if we can use techniques that, in a sense, evoke these vestigial mechanisms that allow us to survive, we should find that we can get people to fall more safely. So that's just trying to give you an idea of the kind of work that we're currently doing. So we're doing lots of this kind of work. Right. I thought I should finish with two of my favourite studies. And I'm going to talk them. They're quite large studies. They have 4 or 5 experiments in each, and I'm not going to talk about all of those. This is really some recent interests that I've started to get into in terms of perception in human performance. The way we perceive the world and the way that affects the way we perform. There is a literature out there that shows that people in authority are perceived to be taller than they actually are. And people who are not in authority are generally perceived to be smaller than they are. No one's examined that in terms of sport. So in this particular study, what we did is we showed people pictures of David Beckham or Yao Ming. And those are the correct relative sizes, by the way. Yao Ming is a very famous basketballer. And as you can see, he's a big boy. So we showed people pictures of perhaps here Yao Ming with a basketball between his feet, or perhaps David Beckham with a soccer ball between his feet. And on a separate booklet, we asked them to mark, relative to the soccer ball or the basketball, how tall he was. So we're interested in whether the reputation that these athletes have as soccer players or basketballers actually influences people's perceptions of their height. So there's an example of someone marking how high perhaps Yao Ming is in basketball. This is what you see. David Beckham, with a soccer ball between his feet, his height is significantly overestimated. Same thing for Yao Ming. With a basketball between his feet, he has significantly overestimated his height. However, Yao Ming, with a soccer ball between his feet, he's not overestimated. In fact, he's slightly underestimated. And interestingly enough, David Beckham, with a basketball between his feet, is also overestimated, which we didn't expect, because David Beckham has no reputation as a basketballer, only as a soccer player. But of course, David Beckham is more than a soccer player now, isn't he? He's an icon. He's a media superstar. He's going to be the next James Bond, I heard. So he's more than just a soccer player. In a second study, we showed, and I apologise for the quality of this image, this is Jerzy Dudek from the 2005 UEFA Champions League. We showed people this static image in a laboratory, just like that, and we asked them to judge Jerzy Dudek's height in the goal. So all they had to do was pick out which one of these represented him standing in the goal. And they did this while the picture was still up there, so they were looking at the picture when they did it. That's actually the correct size there. So this is what it looked like for participants who came into the lab. They saw the image, they estimated Jerzy Dudek's height. So there's no differences there, basically. Then we used a very simple intervention. Should come up now. Here it is. Half of the participants, we showed Jerzy Dudek making a save. And the other half, we showed Jerzy Dudek not making the save. There were 4 of these. Here it comes. This is Jerzy Dudek making saves. Just 4, that's all. 3, and 1 more. So half of the participants saw that. That's all they saw. The other half saw Jerzy Dudek not making saves. Incredibly simple manipulation. This is what we saw. Failed saves. When Jerzy Dudek did not save penalties, suddenly people underestimated his height. Their perception of his height changed dramatically. And look what happened when he made saves. People suddenly overestimated his height. So just like that, in a few seconds of showing those videos, we had manipulated Jerzy Dudek's reputation to the extent that our people in our study, their estimations of his height changed. How relevant is that? Well, this is William Fatty Fuchs. And in 1905, Chelsea Football Club paid £50 for William Fatty Fuchs. In those days, that was probably equivalent of, I don't know, 55 million or something. Just like that, what did they do? They raised Fatty Fuchs's reputation. So just like that, they probably made people perceive him as taller than he was. You'll notice he's already pretty tall. In fact, he's 1.93 metres tall, and he was 127 kgs, which I'm reliably told is just about as heavy as any of the All Blacks. In fact, it's heavier. Why was he so big? Because he was obviously very slow. Because in those days, you could actually score a goal simply by crashing into the goalkeeper and knocking him back over the line. So goalkeepers needed to be big. It's a pretty physical game in those days. Chelsea Football Club were then, and still are, a pretty smart club, and they're into their psychology, actually. They used to put 2 small boys behind the goal. Whenever Fatty Fuchs was in goal, they put 2 small boys behind the goal to exacerbate perceptions of his height. And actually, if you look carefully, there's one of the small boys. How about that? And in fact, Fatty Fuchs was so slow that whenever a ball was kicked and it went past the goal, the little boys used to go and get the ball. And that's where the term ball boy came from. So every time you see Wimbledon and you hear ball boys, remember this lecture. Interestingly enough, in nature, this phenomena is used. This is the great bowerbird, an Australian bird. And the great bowerbird uses the same phenomenon. It creates a size-distance gradient to make itself look bigger to its mates. So what it does is it puts large stones and shells at the front of its bower and smaller ones in a gradient coming towards the bower. It then stands at the back and voila, it looks bigger than it actually is. Pretty smart, huh? If I wasn't married, I would try that. Right, last study, I thought we'd have a little bit of audience participation. So I want you to tell me on which side of the bar is there more space? I want you to tell me how confident you are as well. Left? Is that agreed? And are you pretty certain? Okay. This is not a real experiment, by the way, and I haven't got ethics for this either. Let's try again. How about this time? How confident are you? Right-hand side? Okay, cool. Let's try again. It's getting harder. Okay, well, we're not so confident now, are we? Not so cocky now. Okay, left-hand side has slightly more space. Try again, and one more. Right, very good. Congratulations, whoever got that right. Let's talk afterwards. One more time. Yeah. Ah, now that's good. I hear someone saying it's in the middle. Some cynic thinks this is a trick. Oh, yeah, I should have known who it would be. Indeed, it's not a trick. There's more space on the right-hand side. Why am I showing you that? Well, in this particular paper, published in Psychological Science in 2007, we had become interested in how a goalkeeper can increase his or her chances of making a save. Now, in goalkeeping, goalkeepers actually don't have a high success rate. They usually only save about 20% of penalties that are taken against them. So we started wondering, well, what if the goalkeeper stands off centre? What if the goalkeeper stands right over to the side of the goal? Maybe then that can influence the kicker, and the kicker will go to the side with more space. That makes sense, doesn't it? The problem is, of course, the goalkeeper's got an awfully long way to dive to make a save. So that doesn't work. So then we started thinking, well, what if the goalkeeper stands just a tiny bit off centre? Just enough so that you subconsciously detect which side has more space without realising that the goalkeeper's doing it. And you kick to that side with more space. The goalkeeper then wouldn't have to decide which way to save. The goalkeeper would know that he or she had left more space on the left-hand side and would then dive that way. So we tested that phenomenon. And I'm not going to talk you through all of the studies, but that's 0.5%, by the way. 0.5% is the smallest difference. It's called a just noticeable difference that you can detect. You will think that you're guessing. So many of you in the last slide I showed would have guessed that the more space on the right, but you would have, because I was forcing you to, but you would have thought that it was a total utter guess. It wasn't. You actually detected it. 0.5% is a tiny amount of difference to be able to detect. And here, in one of our studies, we asked people to only kick a goal if the goalkeeper was in the exact middle. So we said only kick if the goalkeeper's in the middle. And what you can see here, there are the kicks. So when the goalkeeper's a tiny fraction off centre, people kick because they think the goalkeeper's in the middle. But what's remarkable is from 0.5% up to 3%, which is still very small, even though people are kicking because they think the goalkeeper's in the middle, they kick to the side with more space without even realising it, which is quite remarkable. We had a study in which we used observational data. And what's remarkable about this is we looked at 200 penalty clips from the World Cup and the African nations and European Championships. We found that goalkeepers always, or nearly always, 96% of them stand off centre. So they don't even, it's very difficult to stand in the exact middle of the goal. In fact, goalkeepers stood on average nearly 10 centimetres off centre without even realising they were doing it. But most importantly, more penalties were kicked to the side with more space. So this observational data showed us that goalkeepers are standing off centre without realising they're standing off centre, and kicks are then being directed to the side that has more space. So if goalkeepers knew this phenomenon was occurring, they would then dive to the side with more space and they'd be more likely to make saves. How powerful is this data? Well, look, I'll show you. This is Paul Scholes in the FA Cup final. I'm not sure why the commentary is in German. So, Jens Lehmann is clearly standing off centre. Would you agree? Where does Paul Scholes kick to? Sure enough, he kicks to the side with more space, and Lehmann goes that way. Now, Lehmann probably didn't know he was standing off centre. He didn't. This is by chance. But I think my final video sums it up really, and I think it sums up how well I'm listened to in my own family, because this is my own son, Ray. So this is Ray here. He's a bit older now. He's in the audience tonight. How about that for a penalty? Isn't that sweet? He's a very smart lad, well ahead of his years. He listens to his dad very carefully. Here he is. Where's he standing? Clearly off centre. Smart boy. How about that? Not bad. Not bad at all. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Roger Moulton. I'm the Dean of Te Kura Tangata, the Faculty of Education, and it's my pleasure to just offer a few concluding remarks and to draw this evening to a close. I think, Rich, you have kept us entertained and certainly informed. I think you demonstrate the power of research and science to challenge things that we think intuitively are as they should be. I think the other thing about it, that each of us here can find an application for everything that you have given us an example of. And it confirmed for me, as someone in education, some things I need to put to right. I need to find all of those previous teachers and coaches who said to my parents, Roger could do better if he tried harder. They should have said Roger would do better if he just relaxed, took his time, and didn't try hard. But I think those notions of reinvestment have important applications across many fields, and certainly the notions of implicit theory. And I was particularly drawn to the idea of errorless learning. And I think from my perspective personally as an educator, that has presented me with some ideas that I need to mull over and think about. I have seen some of Rich's work before, and particularly the work around soccer goalkeepers, and I have to say it's influenced quite dramatically my viewing of soccer now. I'm looking very carefully if there's a penalty as to where the goalkeeper's standing. Of course, as this information becomes more known, of course, that may be reverse psychology in operation. But you've also shown, I think, that your work takes you across many fields and has many applications. So I thank you for sharing it with us. I'm left with a number of abiding images. One is the Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor juggling, but actually it's only topped by my image of you with a moustache. So I would ask you to join with me again in congratulating Rich on such a fine inaugural professorial lecture.